I'm Ari Goldstein, Senior Public Programs Producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. And I'm excited to kick off this evening's program, Snowbirds, a cultural phenomenon. Many of us have known and loved snowbirds in our own lives. That is, seniors, especially Jewish seniors, who fly south for the winter to escape the cold. My own grandparents were snowbirds, originally fleeing from Poland to New York in the 1920s, and then year after year in their retirement, fleeing from New York to Florida to enjoy the sun. But there may not be anyone today who knows snowbirds and the world they built down south, as well as Naomi Harris, a visual artist who moved into a South Miami Beach hotel between 1999 and 2002 to immerse herself in their world and document it for posterity. Naomi's bright, colorful portraits of the bubbehs and zaidehs of South Miami Beach are what we're here tonight to celebrate, explore, and learn from. You can find them all in her newly released book, The Haddon Hall, named for the hotel she called home. You can order your copy at the link in the Zoom chat. Our host this evening and Naomi's conversation partner is Michael Clinton, a writer, photographer, and magazine executive who was, among many other roles, publisher of GQ magazine. Michael has published 8 of his own photography books and is a trustee at the International Center of Photography. His newest book is Roar into the Second Half of Your Life Before It's Too Late. Michael, Naomi, welcome. Thank you guys for being here this evening.
Thank you.
As Michael and Naomi chat tonight, please feel free to share your questions in the Zoom Q&A box and get to as many as we can towards the end of the hour. Without further ado, Michael, feel free to kick us off.
Thank you, Ari, and let me add my thanks to everyone for joining us tonight, especially my friends from Pittsburgh, my hometown. I'm coming into you from New York City. But let me start by telling you a little bit about the remarkable and talented Naomi Harris, tonight's guest photographer and presenter. She's a native of Toronto, but lived for over 22 years in the US, 15 in New York City, a couple in Miami, and 4 in Los Angeles. She graduated from York University and is currently pursuing an MFA in studio art at the University at Buffalo in New York, while commuting to Toronto to take care of her mom. Naomi actually started out in my business, the magazine business, but at the age of 26, realized that her true calling was to pursue photography. She's a proud graduate of ICP, International Center of Photography's one-year certificate program, so she's part of my world in that regards, where she was launched into her creative future. Since then, she has won many accolades, an International Prize for Young Photojournalism, grants from the Canada Council for the Arts, a New York Foundation for Arts Fellowship, and more. One of my favorite stories that she told me is that she received a grant to embark on a 70-day canoe trip following the fur traders' route in Ontario, retracing the journey of British painter Frances Anne Hopkins, who worked on the art world and women's roles in it at that time. Naomi has also published 3 books of her work, including America Swings, EUSA, and of course, Haddon Hall, which is why we're all here tonight. As a true practitioner of her craft, Naomi is what I call a photographer's photographer, as she has captured an historic moment in time with this great body of work that you're going to see tonight. Haddon Hall, a place some of you may have known, has come to life in her book and a collection of photography available for purchase, I might add, the photography and the book. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the incredible Naomi Harris. Naomi?
Thank you, Michael. That's quite the introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm not sure if I have it, that it's just on. There we go. There's our slideshow. So basically, this is the book, but I will show the book again afterwards because I think everyone's just seeing the slideshow. And what I'd like to do to kick this night off is read an excerpt from my book, from the essay I wrote in it. And it goes a little something like this. Get my reading glasses on. My chosen family. At Haddon Hall, all the typical socio-normative roles existed. The popular girl, the comedian, the loner, the Jezebel. The group dynamics brought to mind the same anxieties that plague us all, but with a senior twist. The endless resident gossip, the mean girls who picked on a woman who used to wet herself, everyone wanting to sit at the cool kids table during bingo. It all felt sadly familiar. But the residents could also be kind and generous to one another, sharing snacks, picking up a prescription at the pharmacy, or just lending a helping hand. They showed me that we spend our lives being a parent, a partner, and a useful member of society, only to reach a stage of life where many of us fear will be reduced to no longer having a sense of purpose. But with determination and tenacity, the seniors found ways to stay busy and add meaning to their day and lives. Sylvia. Before I could even get the key into the door of my room, Sylvia, the hotel's matriarch, came careening through the hallway with her walker. She quickly pounced on the opportunity to speak with someone new and young. I had a lot riding on this undertaking, having sublet my apartment and used all of my savings to produce my first long-term personal project. I was nervous about its feasibility. I didn't know where to begin. So Sylvia's breaking the ice brought me tremendous relief. Her seal of approval immediately opened doors for me with the other hotel guests. Sylvia always did as she wished. Curiosity drove the 98-year-old ex-New York spinster. She was up for anything, including clubbing. Intrigued by a television commercial for Club Madonna, the strip club next door, she enlisted me as her date to the club. Gussied up for the occasion, we made it as far as the velvet rope out front. But neither one of us had enough money to cover the pricey 2-drink minimum charge, so we quickly skulked back to the hotel. Sylvia had said she never expected to live as long as she had, something many of the hotel occupants echoed. Ever prepared, she slept with a handbag at the foot of her bed with a note pinned to the outside that read, "Sylvia's prepaid cremation papers," so the hotel would know what to do with her if she woke up a lucky stiff. That was her joke. When she died 2 years later, at the age of 100, the funeral home where she had pre-purchased her cremation many years earlier begrudgingly performed the service. Begrudgingly, because the price had increased drastically since she purchased the funeral package. Rose, Sylvia's friend of many years, lived in some of the same hotels that Sylvia did, and they relocated together several times. Ultimately, they ended up neighbors at Haddon Hall. At one time a brilliant woman, Rose suffered from Alzheimer's and often wandered the hallways in her nightgown. Sylvia checked in on her to make sure there was food in her refrigerator and that she ate. Though Rose was often nonverbal, glimpses of her formal self shone through when we exchanged pleasantries. She sometimes invited me into her room for a visit, but these moments of lucidity were fleeting. She once made me a cup of coffee with her dentures soaking in the sink alongside. One day on my way to visit Rose, I discovered the hotel had cleared her room for a new guest. This is how I learned that her children had placed her in a nursing home. Gina spent 8 months a year in Coney Island and her winters at the hotel. Extremely private, only she knew her exact age. She twirled onto the hotel dance floor, swaying and shimmying suggestively, and hit on all the men, regardless of age. Although she was the same generation as the others, her effervescent personality set her apart. She photographed easily and effortlessly. Gina purred when she talked. She smoked, drank, and could put her legs behind her head. She wore age-inappropriate clothing that upset the more conservative sensibilities of the other women at the hotel. I loved her for it. Some mocked her and thought she was foolish, but she didn't care. She told me she found them dull and unattractive. In this book's centerfold, Gina lies in an odalisque pose. Behind her, a wall plastered with headshots of Hollywood heartthrobs and starlets reveals a glamorous young Gina tucked between images of starlets, Marilyn Monroe and Veronica Lake. Gina's headshot more than holds its own. Gina fought aging vehemently and used her sexuality to get what she wanted. Rumor had it she was involved with the Polish underground. I like to think of her having seduced Nazis and slitting their throats when she was through with them. Clements, Denise, and Madeline. The three Aboriginal French-Canadian sisters, Clements, Denise, and Madeline, did everything together. That included meals, beach and swimming pool outings, and card games. Mainly, they kept to themselves. Denise, an 85-year-old widow, and her 90-year-old sister, Madeline, summered on a reservation in a small Quebec town and spent the winter with their younger sister, Clemence. The latter lived full-time at the hotel with her American husband. Madeline, a former nun with no children of her own, relied on Denise to care for her despite the widow's persistent health problems. Their trip south came to an end when Madeline's Alzheimer's progressed, making travel impossible. I spent many evenings in Denise and Madeline's room playing cards. Their warm dispositions made me feel welcome. One night I had an allergic reaction to a medication and headed to their room. I was afraid to be alone. I started going into anaphylactic shock and asked Denise to accompany me to the ER. She suggested we take the bus. I insisted on a taxi. This was no time to be frugal. Pearl. Melancholy sometimes hung in the air of Haddon Hall, and Pearl was one of the hotel's more despondent residents. In her 90s, she had long outlived her siblings, husband, and only daughter. She married young and never worked, so when her husband died of a heart attack at age 50, she relied on his pension and lived a frugal life. Her daughter married and helped support Pearl, but she died at a young age, childless, leaving Pearl alone. She often talked about how she had never expected to live this long. In and out of hospitals her entire life, Pearl suffered from numerous ailments, including a heart condition, Parkinson's disease, and back problems. Alone and unable to sleep more than 3 hours a night due to her pain, Pearl said she saw no point in her existence. When I asked her if she ever considered suicide, she replied no. The thought was too scary, but should God choose to take her, she'd gladly go. I once accompanied her to the doctors for an electrocardiogram, EKG test. As she lay on the examination table, I noticed the children's sandals on her feet. Pearl often wore children's clothing as it fit her diminutive frame best. The jarring juxtaposition of the suction cups and tubes of the EKG machine hooked up to her legs alongside her Beauty and the Beast sandals struck me as bittersweet. Marie and Mary. Marie, a devout Catholic, and Mary, a Jewish Holocaust survivor, traveled south together every winter from Montreal. They delighted in fashion, wearing the latest styles, and attended every dance, performance, and event held at the hotel. They were best friends, but had a competitive streak. They vied for the attention of men and friends alike. Mary didn't like to share Marie with others. Once, when a fellow hotel guest had taken a bad fall, Marie had helped by washing her hair. Mary sulked, jealous of the attention the other woman received. But such flare-ups like this were short-lived, and their friendship always resumed. As in life in general, the women at Haddon Hall outnumbered the men. One of these men was Sam Klein, a rare gem. Twice a widower, Sam lost his first wife and child in Auschwitz. He survived because of his skills as a tailor sewing Nazi uniforms during the war. He immigrated to New York and opened a dry cleaning business. Later, he married his sister-in-law, also a survivor of the war, and they had a daughter together. His usual routine consisted of taking a snort of brandy right out of the bottle every morning, having a breakfast of cornflakes served in a mug, and talking weekly on the phone with his daughter in California. On Sundays, he waited by the phone until the call came. Sometimes it didn't come. Being extremely hard of hearing, Sam kept to himself, but his sweetness shone through. Every time I visited him, he greeted me with a rendition of Rosemary Clooney's "Come On to My House," slipping a hard candy into my hand. Guest appearances. Some of the occupants of Haddon Hall had fleeting roles, sometimes due to shyness or a sense of privacy, or because of illness or death. Even though I knew Lee for only a few weeks, I remember her long fingernails and chain smoking. When I asked her why she grew her nails, she shrugged and replied, "I don't know. I guess I like them long." She died of emphysema a few weeks later. Dick, an Italian New Yorker, lived in the hotel full time and regaled me with stories of his younger days at the Copacabana Club during the 1950s. Pulling out a business card from an escort, he told me, "It doesn't matter if you have snow on the roof. If you're a man, you're always interested in women." Helen was also a lifer, and she raved about her son, the doctor, though he only visited once a year for a day. Snowbird Betty kept to herself, always with her nose in a dirty Harlequin romance novel. Ida, a sweet grandmother from Brooklyn, emigrated as a child from Poland. She lifted 2-pound weights in her room as though she were training for Miss Olympia. Sue scored the stock market section of the paper daily, as if monitoring investments. These were my friends.
Thank you, Naomi. That was an incredible sneak peek at what was happening at Haddon Hall, and here we are. I'll invite anyone to put questions into the Q&A chat, and I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions. The first one is, what told you instinctively that the residents of Haddon Hall would be a subject for this photographic essay? Because it was a true sort of photographer's instinct, but how did you know you were going to capture this really unique moment in time?
To be honest, I didn't realize at the time what I was photographing. I initially went down to Miami Beach to, I was going to pursue a project on photographing Holocaust survivors. And I had found a lunch program at a community center in South Beach. And there were some people there were survivors, but a lot of people were just survivors of life. They were just, making their way, being on a fixed income, being on a pension, and being old, and in a world where people don't really pay attention to those members of society. And it was raining one day, and I took a couple of women back they didn't want to wait for the bus. And I said, I have a car. Do you want me to give you a lift? And yeah, great. That would be terrific. And I dropped them off at this little hotel. And I'm like, this is where you live? You live in the hotel? And they said, yeah, this is where we live. A couple of them were snowbirds, but a couple of them lived there year round. And they were like, we're having a dance tonight. Why don't you come? Okay, sure. And I was staying a few blocks away at, I rented a condominium through the Canadian Jewish News over at the Shelbourne Hotel. So it was only a few blocks away. So I walked over that night and I went to the hotel, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing, like this lobby full of old people dancing. And I was like, okay, I'm leaving tomorrow, but I have to come back. So I decided to come back the next year and document that hotel. But again, I didn't realize, because, I was 26 at the time, or, I didn't know that it was the end of an era.
Yeah. We have a question from Jane Hill, which is, you read as if detached from the subject, but you must have become attached to some after spending so much time with them and their stories. Can you comment on a few that you really became attached to?
Well, Sam was my out and out favorite. I loved Sam. And it was definitely difficult to talk with him because he was so hard of hearing. I guess it prepared me for living with my dad years later. But they all had special qualities to them. There were certain women that I was definitely, like Sylvia was my, she was very dear to me. And Mona, who I didn't talk much about her, and there were several. I mean, basically, I really did have fond relationships with everybody. Sometimes I would get annoyed. As I mentioned, when I first started reading the first excerpt, there was a woman there that was incontinent, and she often wet herself, and it was no fault of her own. She was just a little bit nebbish, a little bit. I think a lot of it was she was hard of hearing, and sometimes the other women would be mean to her. And when she'd sit down next to them in the lobby, they would say, get away, go sit somewhere else. And I often would say to them, don't behave like that. That's not nice. And it felt like, telling children. But no, these people were definitely like, when I lived in Miami, I don't know for anyone who's lived, if you spent time in Miami, it's a very transient city, and it's really hard to make friends. These were my friends.
That's great. We have a few questions. One of from Jeremy, which is, were people willing to speak openly about being survivors of life or the Holocaust? And another question, how did they feel about being photographed? Did anyone ask them, did anyone say, please don't photograph me? I mean, or was it sort of an open set, if you will?
I mean, as I photograph everything I photograph in life, I've been a photographer for over 20 years. Gosh, I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And if someone does not want to be photographed, I don't photograph them. I'm very comfortable with that. I don't need to force anybody to do something they don't. And trust me, there were times where I would see something, I'm like, oh, I would love to be photographing that right now, but I respect people's wishes.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but most people, sorry.
No, that makes sense as a photographer, I think.
Yeah, but most people, they really did, they felt special. Like by me photographing them, I was paying attention to them. And for them, a lot of people, like I mentioned, Helen, she would always talk about my son, the doctor. Her son, the doctor, would come one day a year. He lived in Atlanta and he'd come one day a year to visit. So
yeah, no, it's Steve, who's one of our viewers, said it's actually very sad that their children, rarely came to visit. They had a, sort of sad and not a very glamorous life at the end of their lives. I think when we were talking, because in the 1990s, 1996, when you went there, the Snowbirds, which were 20,000 plus prior to the gentrification of Miami, they shrunk. It got smaller and smaller and smaller, and everybody who was remaining sort of aggregated into this one hotel, which was sort of the last stop. And Shelley asks, was this a room with a kitchenette, or was it an apartment hotel? And by the way, where did all those other people go who had lived there?
You mean
in Miami, the Snowbirds? Where did they go? They were pushed out. They were pushed out.
Exactly. So some of them, so as they were getting moved around, they would end up at different hotels. The Drexel was one of them that was there at the end. I'm having a hard time with the names of the others, but George Washington was another one. But they all ultimately ended up here because all the other hotels had already kicked them out, renovated. And so the Snowbirds themselves, like the ones who lived there, who were year-rounders or lifers, as I call them, they either, like Pearl ended up having to go to a nursing home. Sam, he had a caregiver through his daughter had someone that would come in and look in on him every few days. Like, or actually, I think Chide would come almost daily. And she ultimately had him move into her home with her. She was like from Guyana, and so picture this little old Jewish man living in this very African-American neighborhood in Miami, but she was like a daughter to him. She treated him so beautifully. The others, some kept coming, and then 9/11 happened. And so gentrification was one thing, but once 9/11 happened, many of them were too scared to travel. And that was the beginning of the end. That was really the end of it.
Did you follow any of them after the photo essay that you produced, in subsequent years? Did you follow any of their lives, the ones that you stayed close to?
Yeah, so Gina, I would see her sometimes in Brooklyn. You have to remember, most of these people were in their like it was before internet. So like I have some letters, like sometimes we wrote letters, a couple of the women and myself would write letters, but a lot of them wouldn't necessarily, like nobody had email. It was before then. And so no Zoom calls, that's for sure. And a lot of them wouldn't even call long distance, if you know what I mean. But it's
pricey. Go back to the question about were they willing to speak openly about being survivors, whether it was of the Holocaust?
No, I mean, of the Holocaust, there were only a couple there that were survivors. Sam was one of them, but as I mentioned, he was very hard of hearing, so he didn't discuss it much or at all, to be honest. Gina, I know that she was in the Polish underground, but she would not talk about it. A lot of them, they had come to America at like age 2. Ida had an accent, but she came as a child, so she came before the Holocaust. So a lot of them, the ones who were in the Holocaust, like Marie, she would not talk about it. Evelyn, so no, but they would talk about their lives. They didn't mind talking about that, but they did not want to talk about the Holocaust.
One of our viewers said that the Snowbirds that she knows own their own apartments, which they use during the winter. They don't go to hotels. But these individuals that you photographed, it would appear they didn't really have the means. They didn't have the ability to own a hotel or even, I mean, sorry, an apartment or even rent an apartment. They needed, is that true?
Yeah. So this was people living, I mean, and this is what's, to me, what's so sad about the end of this Miami Beach era. It was a slice of time when people with little means, I mean, they had a pension, maybe they had a little bit of money salted away, and they could go and enjoy the beautiful paradise of the weather of South Beach, where I don't think there's anywhere in America you could do that today. If you were on a fixed income, you can't do that. It's just it's a small slice of time.
That's true. Did the hotel or in the community offer these folks activities, dances, exercises? Did you say yes?
Yeah. So twice a week there was bingo. Or maybe even 3 times a week there was bingo. There were dances twice a week. Sometimes they would have comedians come. And that would have been all the hotels at one time in South Beach had entertainment in the lobbies.
Right.
So yeah.
One of the questions was, did they have Shabbat elevators?
No.
No.
It was only 3 stories high. So if you, I know of hotels further down the beach that did do that, but nobody was Orthodox at this hotel. I mean, Sam kept Shabbos, but like no one was Orthodox. So no Shabbat elevators.
Right. Talk about the evolution of being a photographer and how your craft evolved. And also, this was a really seminal project for you as a young woman. And how did your Jewish heritage play into your work? How does it play into your work today? Is it something you think about when looking for a project? I mean, this must have been a sort of profound experience for, a young person to come across this group of people in this condition and with their histories and their background. It must have been sort of a huge, eye-opening experience, which you captured so beautifully in these images.
Thank you. Okay, so there's many parts to this. Where do I start? Well, when I was at York University here in Toronto, I was actually studying printmaking, and I used a lot of photographs, but found photographs in my printmaking. So I would source images out of books, magazines, and this is going to date me. This was pre-Google. This was before the internet. So if I wanted a picture,
I think there are many of us on this call who were around for free Google.
Right. So if I wanted to find a picture and I couldn't find it in a magazine, I didn't have the internet to find it. So I decided to take a photo class. And then I went to Europe that summer. I came back, I saw my pictures. I was like, oh, this is what it's okay. This is what I want to do. So that's how I kind of fell into photography. I wasn't like one of these people that are like, I got my first camera at 8 years old. It just, I chanced into it. As far as the hotel itself goes, I think there's growing up in Toronto where all my friends, we would all be in school, and in December we break for, the winter break, the winter holidays. And we'd all leave the same color and they'd come back from the winter break all nice and sun-kissed and tanned, and I'd still be this, pale shade of pale, and they'd all be going down to visit their bubbehs and zaidehs in Florida. And like the comment earlier, most of them, their family had condominiums, and, these were wealthy people of Toronto. These were, I went to a private Jewish school. And so a lot of these kids, they came from families who had places. And my grandmother, she was a single mother, and she worked really hard, but she did not have the means to be able to have a condominium down there, or even to be able to afford to go to a hotel like Haddon Hall. So I always had this idea of what Miami was, and I wanted to see it for myself. So I finally, I'd hear everyone talking about it. Who here remembers the Rascal House and the getting your chicken in the pot at the Rascal House, or the breakfast, and you had the prune danishes and all the little takeaway food from there. I just really wanted to see what Miami was all about, and that's kind of how it all rolled into one.
Well, Steve, one of our viewers points out, which I really hadn't thought about the year, that actually Miami Vice, the first season of Miami Vice was in 1984. and the MTV's Real World in the 5th season of Miami Beach, was not too long thereafter. But if you flash forward from 84 to 96, a lot happened in what was not called South Beach at the time, but there was a lot of evolution and that started and then moved very quickly in this evolution of what we all knew in this lost moment in time that you captured, and of course was completely gone, a couple of years later. So it moved pretty quickly. You talked about
Miami moves very fast. It's a city that, like, if you look at its history, it was coconut farms, and it was land that was taken away from, native people. And then it was, they had built huge mansions, and it was a playground for the extremely wealthy, but then they had a hurricane in the 20s, and then the rich didn't want to go there. And so it really is a very cyclical town.
It's so interesting. Claire is saying that she grew up in South Beach in the 60s, so she knew the life being discussed there very well. Haddon Hall was a few blocks from my junior high school. So someone had asked earlier, was in fact that a real place? Yes, it was. She went to high school with Andy Sweet, and she and another viewer, Susan, asked if you knew his work. He photographed life in the old South Beach.
I have his book over there. I did not know Andy or of his work back then, because again, it was pre-internet times. His work had kind of not been rediscovered yet. And it was through this movie that was on Netflix and this beautiful book of his. And I mean, when I look at that work, I'm always like, wow, we really lost a true talent. And he looks like he was a real mensch, Andy.
Yeah, and so you couldn't have been influenced by him because you didn't know him, which is always the best for a photographer, to have, pardon the expression, a blank slate to work from without the influence of other photographers, and to sort of have it in with your own visual eye and what you capture. I mean, I think just as a photographer myself and as a trustee for the International Center of Photography, the poignant moments and the details of what you captured was and is so unique in terms of, I mean, you could have gone and done portraits of these people, and that would have been quite nice, but you captured them in situ in a way that they really, come to life for us. We can see, the one, I'm forgetting her name, the one who was all dolled up and beautiful with her. Gina. I mean, you can see, you can just, the way you photographed her in her various stages, you can see what she was like and her personality was like. So you really captured many of their personalities beyond just doing the usual, photographer's portrait. So, obviously that was by your eye and by design.
For me, it was really important to live in I lived in the hotel for 2 months myself. And actually, getting back to one of the questions previously, not all rooms had kitchens. My room that I stayed in did not have a kitchen. It had, I think, a fridge, but it didn't have a kitchen. But most of the people the Snowbirds, they all got rooms that were like little efficiencies. So it would have a twin bed, usually not a double, but like a twin bed, sometimes 2 twin beds. And then it would have a little kitchen, like a stove and a fridge. So people could make their meals for themselves. And some people did meals on wheels, but they could actually heat up their meals after the fact. It was kind of like a little SRO, if you will.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, as you mentioned, that there were an Italian from Brooklyn, French Canadians, Indigenous, Jews, Catholics. Did they mix together, or?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean,
they were a community.
They were, exactly. They looked out for each other. I mean, there were a couple that, like I mentioned, the one woman, and her name is escaping me now, where they were very mean to her because she, and it was through no fault of her own. But for example, Denise, Clements, and Madeline, the 3 French Canadian sisters, they were, and I didn't realize that they were Aboriginal. They didn't tell me until much later on. They hid that part because they weren't sure. I mean, and now years later, knowing that they probably went through residential school, like this is something that I wasn't aware of 20 years ago, but now I am. I think they probably kept it a secret for good cause.
Right.
Most of the people were Jewish there, though. Not everyone, but most were Jewish. But that didn't create problems. Like everyone got along with each other.
There was, Steve makes the point that because of anti-Semitism that existed in Miami, many Jews had to live south of Fifth Street.
Yes.
It wasn't until later that more of Miami Beach opened up to Jewish residents. Did you get any sense? I mean, this was 1996, so it was,
1999, actually.
I'm sorry, 1999. So things had evolved a bit, but did you get any sense of that at all while you were doing your project?
No, I mean, when he's talking about when Jews were not allowed to live north of Fifth Street, that was, I think, in the 30s and 40s. I think by the 50s that had changed already. I could be wrong, but no, he's definitely right. That did exist, but that was much earlier.
So one of the questions, one of our viewers said that she disagrees because she grew up there in the 70s. I'm assuming that she's saying there was anti-Semitism that was there, lingering there. So just a comment.
Right.
I'm curious how many total images you produced in the project, not that are in the book, but the total number of images do you have?
I don't know. I've never sat and counted them.
I
shot hundreds, sure, because I shot probably at least 100 rolls of film.
Okay.
Don't forget, it was film. It was chrome.
Yes.
So each roll of film had 36 exposures, but not every picture is going to be good. And
exactly.
so
We all remember those days before some of us went digital.
yeah, it was all on chrome.
Yeah, exactly. And you have you obviously selected for the book X number of images, and you have put together, I believe, you put together 5 limited editions of 18 images. Were those, is that correct? And were those your favorite images, or how did you select them?
So yeah, so what you're referring to is actually, so I had an exhibition back in 2004, and I made a process called sebachromes, which they don't do that process anymore because it was A, very toxic, and B, people just do everything on the computer these days. But that was like taking your slide film into the darkroom. So instead of printing a negative, you're printing from a positive. So I made, I picked 18 images, and yeah, exactly. They were my favorite 18 images. And I made a set of five, an addition of 5. So the set is 18 pictures and an addition of 5. And I'll just move my computer a bit. There they are. I'm in my parents' house. So there's the 3 sisters coming out of the water. There's Evelyn at the hairdresser, Ida lifting the weights, Maria at the pool, and Ria in her stockings, and Madeline in the pool up above. But yeah, so
that's great. That's great. And these are your personal favorites, these 18 images.
Yeah, so when I printed that show, they were my personal favorites. And I believe all of them, there might be a couple that are not in the book, but what's also interesting is I was speaking to a book publisher back in 2000. I laughed that some people have like horseshoes hidden somewhere on them. I'm like Charlie Brown. I have a cloud over my head. I always have a bit of bad luck. Like I was supposed to do this talk in person. Oh, hi, Omicron.
Oh, welcome to Corona.
Yeah,
one of the things which I think is always important that I've learned, mostly through my being a collector of photography myself and knowing many photographers and at the ICP, is when the photographer herself selects the favorite images. That's always a very special thing because they lived the whole experience. They know the stories, but the art of that, as you know, is all the stories, but the average viewer of your photograph doesn't necessarily have the history and the story. So you have to balance the two of those things, which I think you captured very well in your selection.
Well, but I was getting at, I was just going to say that in the book, what's interesting is I was supposed to do a book in 2001. I was talking to a publisher, and then of course a little thing like 9/11 happened. So no one was interested in this, and I put all the pictures away, and I'm really glad I did it because I think it has a different voice now 20 years later. And there were a lot of images in the book that I would not have even considered early on, like 20 years ago, because they were like what you call your B's or your C selects, not my A shots. But I think now, so many years later, it flows better and the story is told better by including images that were, slightly weaker pictures, but they brought on a new life because they changed over time. Uh-oh, Michael, are you frozen? Uh-oh. Is it me that's frozen? Ari.
Hi, Naomi. I think Michael is frozen, but that's fine. We can chat for a couple minutes. Until
That's great. We can go see what's going on in the Q&A while Michael's frozen. Okay, so Dove B, were their grandchildren coming in and out of the hotel to visit during winter break? Not so many. There was a couple of grandchildren that would come, but not that many came over there.
Naomi, can I ask a question? So you were commenting earlier about the class distinctions between the different groups of snowbirds in Miami Beach. Yeah. And you mentioned that there was a great sense of community among everybody who was in the Haddon Hall, but did people have a chip on their shoulder about not having the same sort of snowbird experience as people who were able to own condos?
If that existed, I don't recall anyone being like, oh, those people, or like I don't think they cared. I think they were just happy with themselves and in their own lives. Like they would all get together and maybe if they could walk, they would sometimes walk. Every year, one of the nice things the hotel did do, they always had a New Year's Eve party. So everyone got very dressed up for the New Year's Eve party, and that they supplied a little bit of wine, there was a little snack. And the other thing that the hotel did was for Hanukkah, they would give them a gift certificate to go to Wolfie's, which wasn't too far away. And they would pile into a taxi or walk at the ones that could walk. And, no one ever said to themselves like, oh, we're not as good as the other people. Like, I think in general, people were happy with what they had done. And there was no problems. They didn't say, oh, those are fancy people when we're not. Welcome back.
Thank you. I apparently lost my internet connection. I was just, sorry. Welcome to the world of Zoom and technology. So I don't want to interrupt your comment. Go ahead.
We were just filling in. We were pinch hitting.
I apologize to everyone who's listening in, but that good old technology thing. I'm trying to figure out where we are. I want to pick up on the thread. I do want to talk a little bit about, a creative passion, which you discovered when you were 26, which is, and I'm a big believer that people can find a creative passion at any time in their life. What would you recommend to someone who might be interested in becoming a photographer at any age, whether it's 30, 40, 50, 60, 70? And then I want to get back to a couple of questions that were asked in the chat.
I would say, of course, follow your heart and do what makes you happy. I'm in grad school now at almost 50, and I'm really glad I held off and waited till this stage of my life. I think you should always do what makes you happy. However, it is good to have your bills paid, and it is a really difficult occupation, I would say. And I have a very good friend he's a photographer, and guess what? He's also an ER doctor. So he makes his living out of being a doctor. And then because he's an ER doctor, he can take big chunks of time off and go do his passion, do his photography. And he just published a book last year on the lone soldiers of Israel, and he was able to do that because he wasn't like, if you're always worried about how to pay your bills. I mean, if you look historically, photographers, the best ones, someone like Eggleston, they all come from money. It's good to make money.
That's right. That's great. I can attest to that. I was the president and publishing director of Hearst Magazine. So I was a senior magazine executive. And so my photography career as a photographer ran parallel. I didn't have to worry about making a living. So I have great admiration for people like you who make their living in the creative world.
If I knew then what I know now, I probably would have done it differently, but that's just another story.
Okay. A couple of questions. It's kind of interesting. This is getting into some of sort of the practical pieces. One of our questions came from Dr. Miriam Klein-Kasanoff, and she was asking, what did it cost you to stay at the Haddon Hall at the time, if you remember? And then someone asked, when these individuals passed away, who tended to their funerals and their personal effects? I mean, what happened? So two-parter.
Okay, so
Practical.
I can tell you what I paid when I stayed in the hotel, and it was a lot of money. I was paying $1,600 a month back in 1999 because it was like probably $35 a day times 30 or whatever. I mean, I'm really bad at math, but the Snowbirds and they would probably have a better rate because they were also staying 3, 4 months, 5 months, some of them. And then there were also the people who lived there year round, who I know they were not paying $1,600. Right. They were probably, because also you have to remember in the summertime when it's like, you know, dead's like completely dead season, these people were keeping them afloat. So they definitely paid less. I don't know what they were paying.
Got it. How many people were in Haddon Hall, like when you were there? What would be the total number of people staying there?
I'm trying to remember how many rooms they have. It was 3 floors. It was like the main floor, a second and a third floor. And it's shaped like well, I could look at the postcard if I can. It was shaped like
it was much bigger than
it looks bigger than in the picture, but it wasn't. It was probably about 100 rooms, I would say. Okay. Maybe a slightly larger. Oh, there we go. Here's a picture of the postcard. Okay. So you can see
this was right on Miami Beach.
No, and I want to point that out. It says facing the ocean.
Right.
It did face the ocean by 2 blocks. Like, you know what I mean?
Okay.
Collins Avenue, they're located at 1500 Collins Avenue, and the Ocean Drive is the ocean. So it faces the ocean, not on the ocean.
A little tricky, tricky.
I also just want to say that this postcard, I found this postcard, this is a reproduction, but I found it on eBay, and it was from 1943, and it's very hard to read the writing, but it's Dear Sis. It's from somebody writing to his sister in Connecticut. And basically he was saying how he was stationed here during before they shipped off to Europe. So Haddon Hall was used as a barracks. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the Miami Beach hotels were used as barracks during World War II.
Right. Now that was interesting. Do you know when it was built by any chance?
I don't know when it was built. Probably in the 30s, I'd say.
Yeah. And does the structure exist today, or was it demolished?
No, it's funny you should ask. I have not been there recently. I was supposed to go in March 2020. A friend of mine was having an engagement party in Miami, and I was going to go, and I was going to make a little video for the book. Right. It's now called the Axel Hotel, which is a hetero-friendly hotel. It's an LGBTQ hotel, and they're out of Spain, and they have locations around like all over Europe. And so this is their Miami location. Okay. So it's a gay-friendly hotel.
Okay, very, very good. And how did, going back to the question, when people passed and they were there, who handled the arrangements and the personal effects and all of that?
I guess it really would depend on the family members. Like some of the people had no children. Some of the people would be literally, most of them were women. So let's call them what they, I myself am one. A lot of them were spinsters. But someone, let's say like Sylvia, who literally slept with a purse on her bed that had her prepaid cremation papers. Right. Her joke, if I wake up a lucky stiff, they know what to do with me. Right. She had nieces and nephews, like she had like distant family that they came, and she knew time was coming. She gave stuff away. She gave me some of her things. She gave things away. So the other, sadly, I think for a lot of them, it would have ended up in the trash for a lot of them, their belongings.
I really want to take that guy to task who was the son who only came once a year for a day. Shame on him. I really want to take him to task if I knew that guy today. And, you know, that's really that's a sad story and a horrible story. I'm sorry that.
Unfortunately, that's what happens to a lot of our elderly.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, you know, telling. And I think your story has your essay, your photographic essay has multiple stories to it, because I think it's about aging. It's about, in many instances, there was a poverty layer, there was abandonment layers, there were, you know, economic layers, there was isolation layers. I mean, it really is. It's also a statement just about how we treat our elderly in our culture, as opposed to how we should. Especially, you know, there is a, and I know a lot of this subject because of my new book. There are many more people living to be 90 and living to be 100. And so this is going to be, you know, a big phenomena in our culture over the next decades. There are 90,000 people in the US that are 100 years old today. And by 2060, there will be 590,000 of them.
Well, and this is where we're not doing a good service for ourselves included. Like, I'm listening to a book on tape right now where they're talking about how there's no gerontologist, like that the old people is not sexy. People want to be plastic surgeons when they go into medical school. They don't want to look after old people, and it's going to come back to bite us.
Well, that's changing a lot. There's a lot on this topic that's being discussed. If anyone's interested, Stanford University 2 weeks ago just put out a paper on this topic. It's called The New Map of Life. The children who are 5 years old today, who got good prenatal and early nutrition and healthcare, 50% of them will have the possibility of living to be 100. So this is going to be a phenomena of this different form of living longer and aging than we've ever seen and ever had in the history of the world, quite frankly.
The question is, do we want to live to be 100? I don't know.
It's a question of vitality and so forth. So there are a couple more questions, and I think we're going to be at the end of the hour. I'll ask the first one, and then I think I'll save the one from Joanne for last, because I think it's really a great question. First of all, is there an urge to include the people who affected you more in the project? So if you had a connection to them, were they more front and center? And can you comment on the process of remaining objective when selecting the final images for the book, since you did have personal relationships?
I mean, I do this with all my projects. I tend to pick my favorite pictures, not necessarily based on who is in the pictures. Like sometimes, especially when you work for a magazine, sometimes like when I'm working on those projects, sometimes I'm like, oh, I really hated this person. He drove me crazy.
Yeah.
But you have to put it in because it's a good picture. So I try to pick things according to content. But of course, there are, you know, the people that you care most about.
Right. Spoken like a true photographer. I love this question from Joanne because it's a great cap to the hour.
Okay.
What does Naomi want us to take away from her photos?
That's my dog, Maggie. Hold on. She's going to keep barking.
Who's going to answer the question?
Maggie, come here. Oh, Jesus Christ.
While Naomi is doing that, I will tell everyone that aside from the book, you can get a collection of great photographs in the book, and she does have that limited edition. So tell us, what do you want everyone to take?
I just want to make people happy. I just want people to walk away and this is in all of the work that I do. I try to have a little bit of a sense of humor in the pictures. It's not necessarily like, am I finding a cure for cancer? Am I doing brain surgery? No, but I am hoping to make people happy with the images and give a voice to people, and just make us stop. And, you know, there's the photographers who go and they photograph in war-torn places, and that's all important, but I'm more interested in just
well, I think you definitely gave these wonderful people a voice and a memory and a collection for all of us to sort of think about that moment in time that was there. You captured that beautifully in this essay. So congratulations on that. I think, you know, on some of the pictures, it makes you smile, and other pictures make you sad. But the importance of an emotional response is what really counts.
Well,
So,
that's
yeah,
life. It's bittersweet. Not
That's
everything is laughter and not everything is sad. We need to have a bit of both, right?
that's so true. So well said. So I'm going to thank you, and I'm going to pass it on to Ari, who's going to wrap us up, and thank everyone for joining us. So Ari, please take it from here.
Thank you, Michael. Naomi, it really is a pleasure and an honor for us to show your photos. I feel about them as Michael does. And I just want to add that one of the reasons I was first drawn to them when we came across your work is because there's a lot of photos out there of survivors, Holocaust survivors in our world, but also people who've dealt with trauma. And often like the photos are all about survivorhood. And I love that your photos are bright and interesting and joyful. And what these people have experienced doesn't live at the surface of the images, but it's part of the story you tell, but they have a different feel to them. So they're really awesome. They touched us and hopefully our audience this evening as well. Remember,
Ari, I just want to add that there's a wonderful invitation for you, Naomi, from Miriam, who I had mentioned earlier, and she said she would love you to speak at the Miami Beach JCC.
Oh, thank you, Miriam.
I'm going to have Ari to make that connection.
happily.
Okay, and so that's a wonderful and a lot of thank you, great presentations coming through. So thank you very much, and you can get a copy by Ari. Some people are asking how do they get a copy. You want to repeat that?
Order your copy of the Haddon Hall at the link in the Zoom chat. And I should also mention that everything we do at the museum is made possible through donor support. So thank you to those of you who are members and donors on this call. If you're not, we hope you consider supporting the museum. Ordering books through our museum shop is one way of supporting us. We also hope you'll join us for upcoming programs and events. But it really was a pleasure to have you all with us this evening to explore Naomi Harris's work.
Thank you. And Miriam, my website, you can find me there, naomiharris.com.
That's easy to remember.
Maggie and I both thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Ari, and thanks, everyone, for joining us tonight.
Good night. Thank you.